Welcome to the Sleepless Rōnin. Tonight we will walk together through a story. Not a story of rushing battles, not a story of noise and chaos, but a story of stillness, a story of drifting, a story of history told as gently as the night itself. It is the story of Rōnin, a word that means, quite simply, a wave man, a man without anchor, a man without master. Like a wave that drifts across the sea, without harbour, without direction, without home. A Rōnin was once a samurai, once bound by loyalty, by duty, by the oath to serve a lord. But when that lord was lost, through death, through defeat, through dismissal, samurai became untethered. A masterless samurai, a wanderer, a Rōnin. And so tonight, you will not only rest in the story of a man, but in the story of a people, a class, a way of life. For Rōnin were not one, but many. Such men were outcasts and heroes, lonely wanderers and famous warriors, men forgotten in silence, and men remembered in legend. Before we begin to walk their history, let yourself settle into rest. Notice where you are. Notice the surface beneath your body. Notice how it holds you easily, without demand, without condition. You do not need to carry weight right now, not the weight of today, not the weight of thoughts, not the weight of tomorrow. Like Rōnin who sets aside his sword for the night, you may set aside your burdens. Breathe, in and out, each breath slow, each breath steady, each breath enough. As you breathe, imagine the soft rhythm of waves upon a shore. Each wave rises, each wave falls. Never hurried, never forced, always returning, always continuing. This is the rhythm of Rōnin. This is the rhythm of the story. This is the rhythm of your rest tonight. Rōnin were born from a time of change. From the rise of samurai class, from the shifting tides of lords and lands, from the uncertainty of feudal Japan. But do not worry about battles yet. Do not worry about politics yet. For history, like sleep, does not need to be hurried. We will drift into it slowly, softly, like the moon rising, like clouds passing, like footsteps taken one by one. Rōnin were not always honored. Such men were not always scorned. Such men were both. Such men were neither. Such wanderers lived in the spaces between. Some found purpose again. Some drifted without aim. Some became teachers. Some became mercenaries. Some became legends. Some were forgotten. And yet all shared the same truth. Such men were waves upon the sea of history. Untethered, unanchored. Free and yet lonely. Scorned and yet admired. As you listen tonight, you will hear of their beginnings. You will hear of their lives. You will hear of their end. But most of all, you will hear it in a way that lets you rest. That lets you close your eyes. That lets you drift. For history, too, can be a lullaby. The past, too, can be gentle. The story of Rōnin can be as soft as falling blossoms, as steady as temple bells, as endless as waves against the shore. So breathe again. In and out. In and out. The story begins now, and like the path of Rōnin, it will move slowly. It will wander. It will circle back upon itself. It will not hurry. And you do not need to hurry either. You do not need to follow every word. You do not need to remember every detail. If you drift away, if sleep comes before the story's end, that is not failure. That is the story doing its work. That is the night doing its work. So let it. Let it hold you. Let it guide you. Let it rest with you. Rōnin, the wave men, the masterless samurai. We begin with them, as we begin with the sea, calm, endless, mysterious. Their story is a story of impermanence. Their story is a story of loyalty and loss and freedom. Their story is a story of Japan itself, told slowly, told softly, told so you may sleep. The story of Rōnin cannot begin with Rōnin alone. It begins earlier. It begins with samurai. It begins with a land divided, with lords and clans, with battles for power, with the rise of warriors who lived by the sword. In the early days of Japan, long before cities grew crowded, long before castles filled the valleys, the land was ruled by great families. They held estates, they tended rice, they built shrines, and when disputes arose, they called upon warriors to defend their land. These warriors were not yet called samurai. Such men were fighters, retainers, men who lived to serve their clan. But in time, a word arose: samurai. It meant those who serve, not those who rule, not those who command, but those who serve. Samurai became more than fighters. Over time, these souls became symbols. Over time, these souls became guardians of their lords. Over time, these souls became bound by honor, by loyalty, by a code that would later be called Bushido. To live as a samurai was to live in duty. Duty to a master, duty to a clan, duty above the self. A samurai's sword was not his own. His life was not his own. They belonged to his lord. They belonged to his service. And so, in these early centuries, samurai rose. The Heian period, the Kamakura shogunate, the Ashikaga shogunate. One era passed into another. Each era brought new lords, new castles, new wars. Samurai were always there, their armor gleaming, their banners waving, their swords sharp. But more than the steel, it was their loyalty that defined them, their service that defined them, their belonging that defined them. Yet what happens when a samurai loses his lord? What happens when the one he serves is gone? What happens when the bond is broken? This is where Rōnin are born. Sometimes a lord fell in battle, his castle taken, his family scattered, his lands lost, and samurai bound to him suddenly had no master, no purpose, no home. Sometimes a lord dismissed a retainer for failure, for dishonor, for misfortune, and samurai was cast out. Sometimes a lord simply died without heir, without successor, and his men were left behind, loyal, to no one, servants of no one. These men became Rōnin, wave men, drifting, untethered. The word Rōnin first appeared in these times. It carried many meanings. Sometimes it meant outcast, sometimes it meant wanderer, sometimes it meant dangerous, sometimes it meant free. Like the waves of the sea, a Rōnin was always moving. Like the waves of the sea, a Rōnin had no master. Like the waves of the sea, a Rōnin could crash or could drift silently, depending on the wind. The origins of Rōnin are the origins of impermanence, for nothing lasts forever. Not a lord, not a clan, not even samurai's unbroken oath. And when the oath broke, the man remained. Still breathing, still walking, still carrying his sword, but carrying it for no one, carrying it only for himself. This was not always seen with kindness. A samurai without a master was seen by some as shameful. A man who could not protect his lord, a man who wandered without place, a man outside the order of society. But others saw them differently, as men of freedom, as men of solitude, as men who lived outside the chains of duty. Both were true. Neither was true, for each Rōnin lived his own path, each wave had its own shape, each story had its own telling. And so, Rōnin appeared, not in one day, not in one battle, but slowly, quietly, as lords fell, as wars ended, as lives changed. Samurai served. But when service ended, Rōnin walked. Imagine them, a line of warriors on a battlefield, the banner of their lord raised high, the clash of swords, the cries of war. And then silence. The banner fallen, the lord gone, the men left behind. In that silence, samurai became Rōnin, not through choice, but through circumstance, not through failure, but through change. In those days, such men did not cease to exist. They simply existed differently, unanchored, untethered, drifting. The origins of Rōnin are not just history. These figures are a reflection of impermanence, a reminder that nothing is fixed, a reminder that even the most loyal can become lost, a reminder that even the strongest can drift. And yet, within that drifting, there is still meaning. There is still life. There is still story. Rōnin emerged from the rise of samurai. They emerged from the fall of lords. They emerged from the tide of history itself. And just as waves are born from the sea, Rōnin were born from service. born from loyalty, born from loss, born to wander. Rōnin lived between worlds, not fully samurai, not fully commoner, not bound by duty, not free from burden. Always in between, always adrift. When a samurai became Rōnin, his life changed instantly. No lord to serve, no stipend of rice to collect, no estate to protect, no clan to belong to. The chain of loyalty was broken, and with it, the security of daily life was gone. Some Rōnin drifted into poverty, their armor sold, their swords pawned, their lives reduced to wandering roads, begging for food, seeking any work. Often these men could find, others adapted. Over time, these souls became teachers of swordsmanship. They opened small schools, teaching young men the way of the blade, not for honor, but for coin, not for lords, but for students. Some became bodyguards, protecting merchants, protecting travelers, protecting temples, selling the skills they once gave freely to their clan. And some turned darker. Some became mercenaries, some became bandits, some used their swords not for loyalty, but for survival. The line between warrior and outlaw grew thin, yet not all Rōnin fell. Some rose in new ways, some found a deeper kind of freedom. Without a lord, often these men could choose their own path. Without duty, often these men could choose their own cause. Without obligation, often these men could listen only to their own heart. A day in the life of a Rōnin was never the same. One might rise with the dawn, train with his sword beneath a quiet pine, and walk to a nearby village to offer his lessons. He would eat rice if he could afford it, or wild herbs if he could not. He would bow to passing farmers, and they would bow back, not to a samurai, but to a man who once was, a man who now simply was. Another Rōnin might wander the roads endlessly, sleeping under the stars, living from one coin to the next, carrying his sword not as pride, but as memory, his footsteps steady, though his destination never clear. Another might take service in a temple, shaving his head, wearing the robes of a monk, laying aside the blade but never forgetting its weight. His days filled with prayer, with sweeping floors, with tending gardens. A warrior turned into silence. And so Rōnin lived many lives, poor and hungry, calm and free, scorned and feared, admired and remembered. No two were the same, yet all were alike in being untethered. All were alike in drifting. All were alike in being wave men, riding the currents of a world that had no place for them. Society did not always welcome Rōnin. Many lords looked down on them. Many among them saw them as men who had failed, men who had not protected their master, men who no longer belonged. Villagers sometimes feared them, for a man with a sword and no duty was unpredictable, was dangerous, was outside the order of things. And yet, sometimes the same villagers admired them, for such men were men who had seen the courts of lords, such men were men who carried the ways of the warrior, such men were men who walked alone with no one above them. Rōnin themselves felt both shame and pride. Some longed for service again, to be called back, to kneel once more before a lord, to belong again. Others embraced the solitude. They found peace in wandering. They found strength in having no master. They found identity in being nothing but themselves. In the quiet of night, a Rōnin might sit by a river, his reflection shimmering in the water. He would see the armor he no longer wore. He would see the lord he no longer served. He would see the future he did not know. And yet the river still flowed, the stars still shone, the moon still watched. And so he too continued, step after step, breath after breath, moment after moment. Life as a Rōnin was uncertain, but it was still life. It was still a story. It was still a path. Some paths led to greatness, some paths led to obscurity. Some paths ended in silence, some paths echoed through history, but all paths were the same in this. Such men were walked alone, walked without master, walked as a wave upon the sea, and so Rōnin lived, as teachers, as wanderers, as guards, as bandits, as monks, as men. Their lives as varied as the waves, their stories as countless as the stars, their existence as impermanent as blossoms in the spring. The history of Rōnin is filled with countless names. Many were forgotten, some were remembered, and a few became legends. Two tales rise above all others. Two tales whispered through centuries, two tales of masterless men, one of solitude, one of loyalty. These figures are the tales of Miyamoto Musashi and of the 47 Rōnin. Miyamoto Musashi was born into turbulence. The land was unsettled. The clans at war. The sword was both tool and law. As a boy, Musashi trained not with comfort, but with determination. He learned not only from masters, but from life itself, from battles, from duels, from mistakes. At the age of 13, he fought his first duel. At 16, he had already killed men in combat. He wandered from province to province, seeking challenges, seeking mastery, seeking something beyond survival. Musashi became Rōnin, not because he failed, but because he chose no master. He walked alone. He fought alone. He lived by the sword, but not for a lord. For himself. For truth. Over his lifetime, Musashi fought more than 60 duels, and he was never defeated. His style was different, unpredictable. Sometimes he wielded two swords. Sometimes he fought with wooden weapons. Sometimes he fought not with strength, but with timing, with patience, with calm. He once carved a wooden sword from an oar, and with it defeated a skilled rival. Not because of power, not because of force, but because of understanding. Because he knew the heart of combat lay not in the weapon, but in the spirit. As he grew older, Musashi turned inward. He painted, he carved, he wrote. In his final years, he composed the Book of Five Rings, a work not just of combat, but of philosophy, of balance, of observation, of clarity. Musashi's life was the life of a Rōnin fully embraced, not tied to a clan, not tied to a lord, not tied even to victory, though he found it often, but tied only to the search for truth, tied only to the mastery of self. And so Musashi became more than warrior. He became symbol, he became legend. A Rōnin who found in solitude not emptiness, but freedom. The 47 Rōnin. If Musashi's story is one of solitude, the tale of the 47 Rōnin is one of loyalty. Of men bound not by orders, but by devotion. Of men who carried duty beyond death itself. It began with a lord named Asano. He was a daimyo, a nobleman, proud, young, yet inexperienced. During an official ceremony, he was insulted by another lord, Kira. Angered, Asano drew his sword. But in the shogun's palace, such an act was forbidden. For this, he was ordered to take his own life, and so Asano died. But his samurai remained. Now masterless, now Rōnin, 47 of them gathered. They grieved, they raged, but more than that, they resolved. Often these men could not bring back their lord, but often these men could honor him. Often these men could avenge him. Often these men could fulfill the duty that still lived within their hearts. For months they planned, they disguised themselves, they pretended to scatter. Some became merchants, some became laborers. Such wanderers lived in silence. They waited, and all the while their loyalty burned quietly. At last, one night in winter, they struck. They gathered, 47 strong. They stormed Kira's mansion. They fought fiercely, but not wildly. Calm, determined, certain. They captured Kira, and there they killed him. Not for glory, not for reward, but for loyalty, for honor, for their master. Then, having fulfilled their duty, in those days such men did not flee. In those days such men did not hide, they turned themselves in. They confessed openly. The shogun admired their loyalty, but the law was clear. In their lives, these wanderers had killed unlawfully. And so, one by one, the 47 were ordered to take their own lives. They obeyed, as their master had. With calm, with dignity, with loyalty unbroken. Their graves remain in Japan. Pilgrims still visit, incense still burns, and their story still lingers. A story of Rōnin not as wanderers, not as outcasts, but as men who carried duty beyond death, beyond law, beyond themselves. Two tales, Musashi, the 47, one of solitude, one of loyalty. Both Rōnin, both remembered, both eternal, and so the listener too can reflect on their meaning, on what it means to walk alone, on what it means to serve even when service is gone, on what it means to carry loyalty, to carry solitude, to carry self through the drifting waves of life. The age of Rōnin rose in times of war. But wars do not last forever. Battles end, clans fall, swords are sheathed, and with peace the warrior finds himself without place. In the Edo period, under the Tokugawa shogunate, Japan entered long peace, year after year, decade after decade. A land once filled with battlefields grew still. A land once ruled by fire and steel was ordered by law and stability. Samurai still existed. Their armor still gleamed in storehouses. Their swords still hung at their sides. But their purpose began to fade. Without war, what is a warrior? Without battle, what is a blade? Many lords no longer needed full armies. They dismissed retainers. They reduced their households, and so thousands of samurai became Rōnin, not from defeat in battle, but from dismissal in peace. The streets of Edo, the streets of Kyoto, the streets of Osaka all saw them. Men in worn kimono, carrying swords that no longer served a clan. Men who once stood in courts, now standing at crossroads. Men who once guarded castles, now guarding only their pride. Some Rōnin found work, guarding merchants, serving temples, teaching the way of the sword. Some found dignity in new trades. Over time, these souls became writers. Over time, these souls became artists. Over time, these souls became storytellers. Their swords replaced by brushes, their battles replaced by words. But many did not. Many wandered, unmoored, poor, hungry. They filled the edges of towns. They slept beneath gates. Such wanderers lived in the margins. The people looked upon them with mixed eyes. Some saw danger. A man with a blade and no duty could be feared, could be violent, could be lawless. Others saw romance, a man untethered, a man living beyond rules, a man free from obligation, a lonely wanderer beneath the moon. And so, in the hearts of the people, Rōnin became both shadow and legend, both feared and admired, both real and imagined. The shogunate too was wary. Too many Rōnin could bring unrest. Too many men with no master could disturb the order. And so, laws were passed, restrictions imposed, attempts to control the wave men. But waves are hard to control. They break upon shores, they slip through stones, they rise and fall with the tide. And so did Rōnin. This was their decline, not sudden, not sharp, but slow, a fading, a drifting away from power, a drifting away from necessity, a drifting into memory. Yet decline is not the end, for even as they faded over time, these souls became more than men. Over time, these souls became story. Over time, these souls became theater. Over time, these souls became the subject of kabuki plays, the subject of puppet shows, the subject of whispered tales in tea-houses. The 47 Rōnin were remembered again and again. Musashi's name was spoken again and again. Other Rōnin, forgotten in life, were remembered in plays. Their wandering turned into art, their struggles turned into legend. As time passed, the real Rōnin became fewer. But the idea of Rōnin grew larger. An idea of solitude, an idea of loyalty, an idea of freedom, an idea of loss. The wave men, who once walked dusty roads with tired feet, now walked in stories, in imagination, in memory. Decline is not always disappearance. Sometimes decline is transformation. Rōnin declined as men of power, but they rose as symbols, symbols of a Japan that once was, symbols of the impermanence of duty, symbols of the beauty and sorrow of being untethered. And so their decline was gentle as waves retreating from a shore. Rōnin, once countless, became fewer, and then fewer still, until at last such men were almost gone. But even as they disappeared, the echo of their footsteps remained. In stories, in shrines, in plays, in hearts. The decline of Rōnin was not an end, it was a passing. It was a soft dusk, a slow setting of the sun, a fading of light into memory. And even now, centuries later, their shadow lingers. Their image drifts, their name endures. Rōnin are gone now. The age of swords has passed. The age of lords has passed. The age of wandering warriors has passed. But Rōnin remain, not in flesh, not in dusty roads, not in villages or castles, but in story, in memory, in the quiet imagination of those who dream of them. Rōnin live in plays. In kabuki theaters, their loyalty is acted, their solitude is sung. The 47 rise again and again, avenging, bowing, dying, and being remembered. Rōnin live in books, in tales of Musashi's duels, of his brush upon paper, of his words upon philosophy. The lone wanderer who walked his own path, still teaching through the silence of a page. Rōnin live in films, in paintings, in stories told to children. They live wherever solitude is honored, where loyalty is remembered, where impermanence is accepted. These figures are not only warriors. These figures are not only men with swords. These figures are ideas. These figures are symbols. These figures are reminders. They remind us that life changes, that masters fall, that duties shift, that roads twist, that what we cling to today may drift away tomorrow. They remind us that solitude is not always loss, that wandering is not always empty, that to drift can be to live, that to be untethered can sometimes be to be free. Rōnin also remind us of loyalty, of the men who did not forget their lord, of the men who carried duty beyond law, beyond death, beyond themselves, of the men who chose to bow their heads even when no one commanded them. They remind us that loyalty and solitude are not opposites, that a man may walk alone and still carry devotion, that a wave may drift freely and still reflect the moon. And so, in the end, Rōnin are not only history. These figures are lessons. These figures are reflections. These figures are waves still moving through time. Tonight you have walked with them. You have heard their origins. You have seen their lives. You have listened to their tales. You have watched their decline. And now you rest with their legacy. Like Rōnin themselves, the story drifts. It does not end suddenly. It fades. It softens. It dissolves into silence. Rōnin rest now, their swords at their sides, their heads bowed, their eyes closed. They rest beneath the stars. They rest beneath the moon. They rest in the memory of the world. And so may you. May you rest now. May you set down the sword of your thoughts. May you bow to the silence of the night. May you drift like a wave into sleep. Breathe softly, in and out, in and out. Each breath a step, each breath a moment, each breath enough. Rōnin are gone, the story is told, the night remains, and sleep remains. So rest now, rest deeply, rest peacefully. Good night.